εγώ είμαι Θεός, ο πριν και έστω το παν, και πρωτοστήνε την γη και των ουρανών, κοινώς κοντα πάντα, ως όρος Πατρί και όρθερον εν ήμι.
Δόξα Συ ο Θεός ημών, δόξα Συ, λόγος συνέστησαν των ουρανών αματική, συνείδηνα το Πατρί και διαλόγου φέρω το δε παν, ο λόγος σοφία και δύναμις και οίκων και συνεργός και ισουργός.
Δόξα Συ ο Θεός ημών, δόξα Συ, εις όρους επετών, εις ο αιώνας.
Greetings, Uncle Traveller Matt here, and reporting on day 5, maybe, of my trip to Cyprus. I am now sitting in the courtyard of our hotel in Larnaca on the southern coast, and I'm going to report on what we've done today, which is essentially explore the northern half of Nicosia, or Lefkosia, as it's called in Turkish. So the big news is that I have potentially ticked off another country, and that is the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus. We woke up early, we had breakfast in our rather North Korean looking hotel with this really freaky lobby area that reminded me of some of the stuff I saw on the DPRK. Then walked into Nicosia, the old city, walked straight through to the Turkish half. So you have to go through passport formalities. Of course, according to the Republic of Cyprus, you're not actually leaving their country because they claim the northern bit of the island as well as their territory, but you are entering the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus because obviously they don't have claims to the south, but they do say that they're a proper legitimate country. But it was all very relaxed, and we were like the only people there. But I think that was because it was quite early. We were in there before 9 o'clock, and then we explored an area that's actually the perfectly circular city, because it's built within Venetian defences, is almost precisely cut in half. So it was the northern half of the city. And what was amazing is it felt so different to the southern half. I mean, neither Alex or myself fell in love with the southern half. There were little corners that were nice, but it was rather busy, it was rather messy and ugly in places. But the northern half is so quiet, and it's much pleasanter. There's so many more old buildings, and actually when you get away from the main drag and the area around the main mosque or cathedral, as you were, it's very quiet. It's residential. We're talking 1-2 story buildings most of the time, and actually quite dilapidated. It certainly feels a lot poorer. But anyway, so we went first of all to the cathedral. It's not a cathedral, it's a mosque. I forgot who it's dedicated to, Selim, I think, but who was the conqueror when the Ottomans took Nicosia. But it's actually a former Frankish cathedral, and it looks like a French Gothic cathedral, apart from where the tower should be. There's 2 big minarets. The bad news is that it's under restoration. We couldn't go in. We also couldn't go in the Bedistan, which is another old Frankish building next door. I think it was a church. But what we did do is we had a tea in a nice shaded cafe between the 2 buildings, which was nice. Then we went into like an ethnographical museum, which was another of these Ottoman houses, like the one we'd been in the day before. But this one wasn't as good, if I'm honest. It was nice, but it wasn't as good. We also went in a Lapidary Museum. Lapidary means like stonework, so it was basically a storeroom for carved stone that the British had set up. But what was interesting was the building, which had been a Frankish palace. So again, it had that Western European feel, Gothic architecture, and then the Turks had used it as a khan, or basically an inn for people to stay in. And then we'd wandered through and we saw ruins of mosques or churches that had been converted into mosques. And there was one church that was still a church, but it was all locked up. And then we got to basically the main drag, and we had a snack. Here's a little interesting one. So the lady on the table next to us, she was speaking Russian very loudly into her phone, and then as we were eating, she turned around and she asked where we were from, and she was from Moldova, and I said, "Oh, are you from Transnistria, because that's the Russian enclave in Moldova?" And she said, "No, she was from Moldova proper." And she was quite friendly, but she looked like one of those people who had a bit of a hard life. She was quite young, and if I was going to be stereotypical, I would say she looked like a working girl, and I think she probably was, because she stayed at that table drinking tea for the whole time we were there, which was quite a while. And then we went away and we went to a couple of museums, and when we came back, she was still sat there, and I think she was there waiting for work. Yes, and I'll get onto that in a second, actually, because I'm going to tell you about the two museums. So one was brilliant. It was a dervish tekke. Now, unfortunately, as with Turkey proper, the whirling dervishes aren't operating these days. But the tekke was well preserved, and it was a really interesting exhibition on the dervishes, that I've always found fascinating. And this was probably the best one I've seen, the best preserved. And then there was the house of the former vice president of the Republic of Cyprus, because there was a deal that the president, who was Makarios, had to be a Greek Cypriot because they were the majority, but the vice president had to be a Turkish Cypriot. And so he, worked alongside Makarios, and he was a doctor who'd every Friday he would work for free, treating poor members of the community, and he actually came across as a nice bloke, but then I guess he would, because this was a museum dedicated to what a nice bloke he was. After that, I went to a bookshop that was recommended in the guidebook, and I picked up a book by a Turkish author called Hakan Menguc, and it was called No Encounter is by Chance, and it's a Sufi work. And I thought that was really, they didn't have many books, but I picked this one up. And it was about Sufis, and it was about going on a pilgrimage. And, well, me, with anything pilgrimage, I'm a bit of a sucker for it. But also, I'd just been to a Sufi tekke, so I thought, oh, right, maybe I've been trying to tell me something. And I say no encounters by chance, and it's saying that all the meetings that we have on the road, have a meaning to them. And I do wonder what was the meaning of that meeting with that young lady, and I was almost tempted to go back and have a talk to her to see if I could have transformed her life, but I didn't, because I didn't, and maybe that was a lost opportunity. But anyway, yes, whatever. Just behind the bookshop, there was a very interesting area of social housing, and I think it was built by a religious foundation, a waqf, they're called, about 100 years or so ago, and they recently restored it, and it was really pleasant, like white working class housing that was restored, and it was really nice. What was also interesting is near there, and I'd already seen two of these before, was a tomb of a soldier, like a Turkish janissary, who died in the siege, and it was kept as a sort of shrine. And in the market that we'd visited near the cathedral, so we'd gone in a big covered market that was quite amazing, actually, right on the Green Line, this covered market. And one of the interesting things was an African shop there, and there are a lot of Africans in Nicosia. I don't know why, but on both sides. But there'd been this little mosque which was dedicated to a general who'd fallen in the siege of Nicosia. I mean, the siege of Nicosia is interesting because there was, I think, about 50,000 people inside the city, and only about 11,000 could fight, and we got an army of hundreds of thousands outside, and yet it still took them about 80 days to get to, sack the city. But when they did, they were pretty nasty. Anyway, back. So yes, there are all these graves of janissaries all over that are kept like Muslim shrines. And then we walked into the Arab Ahmet area, which is really pretty actually. There was a mosque there, and we would have gone in. It was actually the first proper Ottoman mosque and not a converted church that we'd seen. But there was a service on it, being Friday prayer, so we didn't want to intrude there. And we went to the Armenian Church, which has recently been restored. Again, a converted Catholic Frankish church, and it looked like something from Western Europe. But the interior, I recognised as Armenian from having travelled there. But that was that. By this stage, I was really tired. Alex has a bit more staying power than I do, and I mean that more mentally than physically. Like, my brain just couldn't take anymore. So I retreated to the Great Khan. So I should explain the concept. Khans are like covered. They were like inns, and they were around a courtyard. The lower floor is for stabling animals and storing goods, and the upper floor was rooms to stay in. And you get them all over the old Ottoman world. In the Arab world, they're called caravanserais. And I've been to them in Bosnia, in Romania, in Turkey itself, and in Arab countries. And this was one of the finest. It was absolutely excellent. And I sat at the cafe there, drinking tea and reading the Sufi book, which was really good. And I actually just finished it. I read it in a single day. Had a little doze. Alex joined me later. Wrote some stuff up, and it was just nice to relax and people watch. It was glorious. And the tea shop we sat in was run by a really friendly old guy. It was nice. About 4:00 we left, walked back to our hotel, picked our bags up, went to the bus station in which of course we were back on the Greek side then, and then we caught the 5:30 bus to Larnaca, and we're going to be based here for I think 3 nights, basically 2 days, and it's a large city on the southern coast. It looks pretty much like a standard Mediterranean holiday resort, but where we are is the older bit, and we're right next to a mosque that looks quite interesting, and it says Larnaca Castle, but it looks more like a Venetian fort, and the actual place where we're staying is a really old and atmospheric building. It's really, really nice. It's the nicest place we've stayed so far. So so that's that. We just had a fantastic meal of seafood, glorious, and that's been today. So yes, I can say I've ticked off another new country, but of course these days I don't just want to tick them off. I actually want to know those countries. So I will be going back to Turkish North Cyprus in a few days' time. But for now, that's where I am. Keep traveling. See you later.
Είδετε ότι εγώ είμαι Θεός, ο πριν γενέσω το παν, και πρωτοστήνε την γη και των ουρανών, γινώσκον τα πάντα, ως όρος Πατρί και όρον φέρον